Madam President, thank you. I'm rising today to talk about an issue that affects us in Ohio, but affects retirees all around the country. And let me just start by saying this. If hundreds of thousands of retirees were getting their Social Security benefits that they had worked for cut by as much as 70%, there'd be an uproar nationally. People would consider it totally unacceptable. It'd be a top news story every night. People would say, okay, these retirees played by the rules, they did everything right, and yet they're seeing these big cuts. How could this happen? Yet that's exactly what's happening to about 400,000 members of the Central States pension who are facing this fate of cuts up to 70% as soon as July 1st of this year. And again, these are people who worked hard all their lives, put money into the pension system, assuming it would be there, made their financial plan based on that, and now they're suddenly finding massive cuts. Some's 20%, some's 40%, some as high as, again, 70%. It's time for the Senate to address this, to come up with a fair solution. The Central States Pension Fund consists mostly of union truck drivers. And they have seen their pension fund severely decline. That's why we're in this situation. The pension suffered big investment declines during the Great Recession, as did other pension funds. One difference is they missed the market rebound because they had a large population of new retirees, and they had to withdraw large sums from their pension for those payouts. So one of the largest pension funds in America is in trouble. It would be projected to go bankrupt in about a decade, and that bankruptcy could be so large that it would have a very negative impact on this larger fund called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, that insures the fund. We don't want that to happen because that could leave, of course, hundreds of thousands of retirees with severely reduced pensions or no pension. So something has to be done. Math is math. I understand that. By the way, the Central States retirees understand that. They know there's a problem. But I got to tell you, the way Congress and the President have dealt with this is totally unacceptable. This is what Congress did. The House of Representatives worked on a proposal. It was crafted in the House, not in the Senate. It allowed the pension to possibly avert bankruptcy, and I say possibly because, as I'll talk about later, even this proposal doesn't mean they're going to avert bankruptcy. But they did so by cutting the benefits of current retirees substantially, severely in some cases, again, by as much as 70%. They then took this proposal, it's called the Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act, or MIPRA. Pension Reform Act, MIPRA. They took it and they buried it inside of a $1 trillion spending bill, which, frankly, nobody read, because it was one of those last-minute bills. It was an end-of-the-year spending package, an omnibus spending package, as they call it, and put this in, sent to the United States Senate, and members of the Senate were told this is an up or down vote. There were no hearings in the Senate. There was no transparent process. I remember about a year and a half ago when this happened, we were told that if the Senate didn't quickly pass these near unprecedented pension reforms, with no hearings, no opportunity for amendments, no opportunities for amendments on the floor of the Senate, that the spending bill would fail. This, to me, is Washington at its worst. You bury something in a spending bill that has nothing to do with the spending bill, in this case, a pension cut, and then you basically try to blackmail lawmakers into voting for it by saying, if you don't vote for this, the whole bill goes down. I voted against it, as did other members here in the Senate, but it passed. And of course, President Obama quickly signed it into law, and suddenly these retirees were sent notices saying, you've got this big cut in your pension. And look, I agree the status quo is not acceptable. I think over time it would lead to pension bankruptcy, and something has to be done. Difficult decisions are necessary. But MIPRA was an unfair remedy because it did not go through a fair and open and transparent process, and also because it didn't give these workers or retirees a sufficient voice in their own future. They did not have a voice in crafting the reforms because of the way it was structured. So after months of meeting with Ohio workers, and we probably have 48,000 Ohioans who are affected by this. After meeting with retirees, after meeting with other stakeholders, including the administration, I introduced what's called the Pension Accountability Act. And basically, it just gives workers and retirees a voice in this process. Right now, MIPRA does allow there to be a vote by workers and retirees, but for these large plans, the vote's non-binding. So, yeah, there's a vote, but it doesn't count. Even if the participants vote 100% against the reforms, it wouldn't stop the cuts from going forward. That's crazy. That's certainly not democratic. Additionally, the vote is designed unfairly. Here's how it works. If a retiree or a worker chooses not to take out a ballot and vote, it's automatically counted as a yes vote for the plan. Imagine how that would work in U.S. presidential elections or other democratic processes. That's not how it works. If you submit a ballot, you should be counted. If you don't submit a ballot, it shouldn't be counted. So the Pension Accountability Act fixes these two problems. First, it makes the retiree and the worker vote binding. This will give workers and retirees a seat at the table, and the majority vote would be required for any pension cuts to go forward. Second, it makes the vote fair by counting the ballots as they should be counted, not counting unreturned ballots as an automatic yes vote. These common sense reforms gives the workers and the retirees more leverage. It gives them a fair shake, a say in the process, because their vote's going to be needed in order to implement these pension changes. They're going to have a seat at the table to find the right balance. Again, we know these pensions are in trouble, and some changes are necessary to prevent bankruptcy that could leave some families with nothing. So let the process play out. If the businesses, the unions, the workers, the retirees can craft a solution that will win a majority vote, more power to them. But let's give everyone a seat at the table and let these retirees have a vote. The goal should not be to stop all pension reforms. If Central State continues its road to bankruptcy, then everybody loses. But the goal should be to say to those affected, you have a say in how these reforms are designed. It brings accountability. It opens the lines of communication on both sides of the bargaining table to come up with a fair solution. There are some other proposals out there, one in particular. I think the Pension Accountability Act has a much more realistic chance of enactment, because I do not believe a massive tax increase is viable. And by the way, it's the only reform proposal with bipartisan support. In fact, between my bill and the House companion legislation, we have 9 Democrats and 9 Republicans. In the meantime, for the reasons I've discussed, the Department of the Treasury should not accept Central State's application. They should reject this proposal to cut benefits up to 70% for some of the retirees, as we've talked about. By the way, even if all the application's positive market assumptions play out, there is still, we're told, a 50% chance that the pension goes bankrupt anyway. So this doesn't exactly inspire confidence in this plan, and I think they should go back to the drawing board. And by the way, I'm open-minded to other solutions that would provide funding from inside the multi-employer pension system. There are different ideas out there. We should talk about them. Let me finish with a story about a guy I got to know through this process. His name was Butch Lewis from Westchester, Ohio. Butch was a star baseball player in high school. He was actually drafted out of high school by the Pittsburgh Pirates. But instead of going on to a career in baseball, he heard the call of duty and he volunteered to join the United States Army and to serve in Vietnam. He became an Army Ranger. He was seriously injured while rescuing fellow soldiers. He was sent home with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. When he came home, Butch reunited with his high school sweetheart, Rita. He started a family, and he started working, despite his injuries. He spent 40 years as a truck driver. The lack of shock absorbers in those old trucks hurt his knees a lot, the knees that had been injured in Vietnam in battle. Ultimately required 37 surgeries. But he kept working. He never complained. He sacrificed for his family and for their pension to the point of foregoing pay raises, vacations, other benefits to guarantee that he had a sufficient pension for retirement. And they planned on it, like you would. or anybody would. Finally retired a year ago, Butch was surprised when he received a letter in the mail saying that his pension would be cut by 40%, the pension that he was depending on. So after all those years of work and sacrifice, his pension would be deeply slashed. Butch felt betrayed, and I think that's understandable. And he organized with his fellow retirees an effort to try to defend those pensions, and that's how I got to know him. He came to Washington, D.C. to meet with me here. I also met with him in Ohio. I listened to his story. I listened to his wife, Rita, who's very articulate. And, we addressed different ways to try to save his pension. He's one of the reasons we came up with this legislation. This past New Year's Eve, feeling this stress, Butch became ill, and he died of a massive heart attack. He was 64 years old. So his wife, Rita, is left to pick up the pieces. She's now lost her husband. Her own dad is battling stage 4 cancer. She's looking at a 40% cut to her survivor's benefit. She's preparing to sell the house that she and her husband, Butch, saved a lifetime for. She's wondering what her future is going to be. She's a very strong woman. She's worked tirelessly to save for these pensions. And now she's fighting to make sure her husband, all the hard work that he put in, was not in vain. So this is who we're fighting for. Think about Butch Lewis when we think about what we should do. Think about Rita and 400,000 other members of the Central States Pension Fund. These are people who played by the rules. They worked hard, and yet they face, in their retirement years, possible financial ruin through no fault of their own. This is why we need to pass the Pension Accountability Act. And we've attempted to offer it as amendments in previous legislation here over the last couple months. We're going to continue to do that. We're not going to give up. I would hope that this United States Senate and the House would see that by giving people a voice, it gives them leverage, and we can come up with a better and a more fair solution for everybody. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time and